A healthy life starts with great sleep. Wake refreshed with Avocado's GOTS-certified organic green mattress, delivering breathable, back-loving support, natural materials from Avocado's own sustainable wool and latex farms, easy financing, a 1-year sleep trial, and deep, restorative slumbers. Organic sleep awaits at avocadomattress.com.
Craftsman Days are here at Lowe's with big savings on the tools you need. Right now, get a free select tool when you buy the Craftsman V20 2-pack battery kit. Whether it's the backyard, the bathroom, or beyond, Craftsman has the tools to help you power through and get the project done right. Because DIYing is unpredictable, but your tools shouldn't be. Shop Craftsman at Lowe's today. Valid through 6/18 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Hey, Unbroken Nation, we'll be right back to the show, but I wanted to let you know that you can grab a copy of my first book, Think Unbroken, Understanding and Overcoming Childhood Trauma, for free. If you go to book.thinkunbroken.com, you can download the PDF ebook version of the book and get everything that I know about the baseline of healing trauma for free, downloaded to your email right now. Just go to book.thinkunbroken.com to download your copy of Think Unbroken, Understanding and Overcoming Childhood Trauma for a PDF for your phone. Again, that is book.thinkunbroken.com. You're listening to the Think Unbroken podcast, and I'm your host, Michael Unbroken. I'm an author, speaker, coach, and advocate for adult survivors of childhood trauma and abuse. In this podcast, you will learn how to transform your trauma into triumph, turn breakdowns into breakthroughs, and go from victim to being the hero of your own story. You can learn more at thinkunbrokenpodcast.com, and of course, check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify at Think Unbroken Podcast. One of the things that I am incredibly fascinated with is the dynamic of interpersonal human relationships. In part because of my own dynamic of interpersonal human relationships, and in part because as a human, you're going to have relationships. From the moment you're born, you're going to have a relationship with your mother and your father, whether they're there and present or not. You're going to have relationships with your family members and the people around you. And until the day you die, you're going to have a relationship, not only with yourself, but with others. And as I think about relationships, I also think about how deeply ingrained and embedded we are into the relationships we have with our own mothers. And one person who has had the wonderful gift of having this conversation about those relationships with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, my friend Jackie. Welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Michael. It's so nice to be the flip side.
Yeah.
Me being the guest and you asking me some questions.
Yes. And the first one, why should anyone listen to our conversation today?
Wow, that's a lot. That's a big one, because there's a couple of reasons why I started this podcast, and I should have listened to My Mother's My Show. So my mom, first of all, would hate that name because that wasn't what she was all about. But what it is about is, are you who you are today because of or in spite of your mom? Your mom has a bond with her child, son or daughter, that is irreplaceable. You have a completely different experience with your mom and your experience growing up, as I and the hundreds of guests that I've had on my show. It's also a part of Native American traditions. The oral history was told, and the essence of passing down the historical references, the historical stories. And if we don't spread the word, if we don't express how we feel or what we experienced, if we don't share that with anyone else but your therapist, but then they can't really share it, then how do we learn? I mean, I feel like I have a PhD in motherology, if that's going to be a thing. But it's not so much becoming an expert or knowing everything. It's just a matter of listening to the stories and being compassionate and understanding and taking the time to see how people piece their life together. Some people had wonderful relationships with their mom and some didn't. So it's what you do with those life lessons in your steps to becoming an adult and how you choose to live your life. That's the long answer.
When you reached out to me, my team said, "Hey, there's this really interesting podcast. We think you should do it." And my initial response when I read the title, and this is again like looking at it right off the bat, opening up the package and going, I don't think so. And then I sat in the reflection for a little bit and I was like, why? And the why, because like many of the listeners of Think Unbroken, the relationship with their mother is not one that they often find fond nor something they care to talk about, especially in a public capacity. And as I sat and I thought about that in the context of my own journey, experience, and story, I also realized that because of the reconciliation I've had with my mother and the experiences that I had from the abuse dynamics, her cutting my finger off, all the things that many of the listeners of this show know, I realized that one of the things that we get to do is we get to give people permission to walk down their journey and perhaps reconcile or even find recompense for themselves and their experience with their mother. And that's what the thing is that you do. And I didn't recognize that from the title of the show. Obviously it's so much more complex than things I should have listened to my mother. It's like, wow, look at the way this dynamic shapes and creates it. So I'm just curious, what was your relationship like with your mother? What in that created the impetus to go and create a show?
Our mom was amazing. Her name is Linda. She's passed. I come from a large Italian-American family. Not so much Italian-American, more Mediterranean Italian, if that explains things a little differently. But she was very progressive. I mean, my dad was born in 1912, my mom in 1920. So they're kind of two generations ahead of many of my contemporaries. They lived in a different world. My dad was in World War II. They survived the Depression. They had a different life growing up. But when these two people that fell in love, different backgrounds, different experiences, but were so connected and on the same page, spiritually, philosophically, ethically, family was the most important thing. So that said, my family we grew up in the Northeast, basically New York State, Long Island, Brooklyn. The 4 older kids were born in Brooklyn, New York. Then my father got a job overseas in Spain. He was a civil engineer, and he was doing a big job for the Navy. There, the 3 younger children, of which I'm one of them, because I'm the youngest of the 3, we were born either in Gibraltar or Spain. So we had 5 years, my family had 5 years of living in Europe. Both of my parents were Italian, so they had parents and grandparents that had lived in Italy and then came to the United States. But here we were in the 60s, late 50s, 60s, living in Spain. So when they returned to the United States in the 60s, my sisters, my older brother, 1 brother and 6 girls, they were very European. They had a completely different life. They were wearing clothes, not, US 60s sex revolution. They were wearing more European knee socks and maybe different, totally different vibe. They were more European than American. Their English was there, but it wasn't very strong. So my family had a transition to moving back to the United States. So family was the unit. We had family dinners every single night, probably wouldn't eat until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, candles on the table, flowers, fresh cut flowers on the table. We all sat around a big, beautiful round dinner table. We all helped with the meal. We all cleaned up. We sat there with coffee and fresh cut fruit and discussed politics or what was going on in the world. So it kind of was like it was a movie almost. We were very much not American. We were more European. We were tight-knit. We didn't get to go out all the time as kids, all that typical stuff. They didn't ground us, but they just said, no, you can't go out. So spiritually, religion-wise, ethically, all of that, it was family first and foremost. So that gave us this strength and this glue and this bond. And we are all, 7 of us are still very, very, we talk a couple of times a day, pretty much all of us. So it's very unusual. My mom, she had worked before she got married, and then she never went back to work after she got married. And then she started the family. But she was brilliant. She was an artist. She would sit and read the New York Times kind of on the floor and spread the whole thing out. She would stay up all night long and design clothing for us. She used to take classes for designing her own patterns. She would take art classes on top of managing a house full of 7 kids. She spoke 3 or 4 languages because she lived in Peru when she was 17 or 18. She had gotten a job with the State Department. So she was extraordinary. She was way ahead of her time. She wasn't a women's libber. She felt that she could achieve her objectives just by being intelligent and having an opinion and being able to voice her feelings. You know, she wasn't out there burning her bra. She probably wouldn't have done that, but she had a job doing incredible things before many, many women did, you know. So she was extraordinary. She was human too, you know. She definitely, I wish I could have the conversations with her now. Like, what would you have done differently raising your 7 kids? I don't think she would have done anything differently, you know. I mean, obviously the older kids had a different relationship with her than the younger 3 did. You know, by the time I was in high school, I got to take the car to school every day. You know, I was not spoiled, but I definitely had liberties more so than my older siblings did. That's a lot to throw at you.
No, I love, you know, what's funny is that what it's bringing up in me is when I was younger, I would be so mad at you for having such a good mom.
I feel bad talking about it, but I don't have to feel bad talking about it.
No, and you don't. And part of the thing that I always feel encouraged by now, obviously not being younger and being a grown man and having so many different learnings and understandings and recognizing the human experience that everyone has, is it's different for everybody. And I'm sure there were ways that your mom messed you up, and there were ways that my mom messed me up.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of the nature of it, right? And when I hear stories like what you just shared, the thing that comes to me today is, which I hope other people will take, and this is why I said this, is like, I'm glad, because that's what it should be. And if we can create markers experientially and through these stories, and other people can go, well, that's a possibility. Imagine what they can do with their families, right? One of the big things for me, and the reason why I launched this show 7 years ago, 800 something episodes, blah, 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 is like, I just want people to create better lives. I don't want people to have what I had. So when I hear that, I'm like, amazing. But I know it's not all flowers and fresh fruit and coffees, right?
Oh, no, she was
you have
human.
human experiences.
Linda, she, oh my gosh, how many times did she pack her bags and then start walking to the train station? She's like, I'm out of here. You guys are lazy and you're not, you know. We were supposed to clean our house every Friday and Saturday, and we would drag it out till Sunday. You know, we did so much for our family, but she must have completely lost her mind. I don't know how she dealt with 6 girls and 1 boy. I mean, it was crazy. And my dad was working. So she basically, she'd go to mass every morning. She'd make us all breakfast. We'd all get to school. If any of my older siblings missed the bus, that meant that she had to drive them like 40 minutes one way. And she even got pulled over a couple of times by cops, I guess, for speeding. And she would start yelling at them like, why are you pulling me over? I'm a mom of 7 kids. Why don't you go get the bad guys?
Valid.
You know, so she vented whenever needed. I wish I had, you know, as a mom myself, I have 2 boys in their early 20s, but we don't know. That's one of the most intriguing things about this journey, is that, did you really know your mom as a person, you know, when you were a child? Or was she this woman that was either invisible or, you know, you had her on a pedestal? You know,
Yeah.
we're all human, right? We all have jobs to do, whether it's at work or at a home. But I wish I could have those conversations with her now. But I think she was so much fun. She was a lot of fun. And she loved her kids, which was really important.
I don't think, to your point, I mean, I don't think people do know their mother, right?
Oh,
And I
I think
think
so.
that it's by proxy of this idea that, there's these expectations that mothers have to be a certain way. And, as well as I do, like anytime we place expectations on other people, I mean, realistically, especially if they're high, it's not going to come to pass. I remember I was sitting in my therapist's office one day and I was having this really hard moment where I was like, I don't want to be here. I cannot believe I'm here. I'm cleaning up other people's messes. Why am I fixing all the problems that my mother caused? And you talk about like a brave moment from a therapeutic perspective. He looks at me and he goes, have you ever imagined what your mother's childhood was like? And like a switch flipped in my mind, right? Because I was like, wait a second, this is so different because now you're looking at this thing about a human. Now you've interviewed, and this is I want to get into the kind of the juice of all this because you've interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people literally only about the conversations around their
Their
relationships
mother.
with their mother. Nobody does, you're the only person I've ever heard of doing this. And this is why I was so intrigued and why I wanted to share you here and highlight this. What stands out to you? Like when you think about these conversations, what are we missing? What stands out? What are the kind of things that you start to notice, the patterns, the things that from the outsider's perspective, you get to divvy into and look at from this nuanced fine-tooth comb perspective? Where are we just as individuals, and not necessarily to put our mothers on pedestals or even to defame them, but
Mhm.
what are we missing in the conversations that you get to see every single day?
Well, I guess the big part of it is it doesn't matter if it's your mom or your dad or some adult that was in it's you can create your own future. And I know this has been a journey for you, regardless of what you were given. Those are your stepping stones. And sometimes people take a long time to figure that out. You know, you had a really tough experience, but you told me the story when you're like, I'm tired of doing this. I'm tired of talking about my mom. I'm tired. Then change your life. And sometimes people don't understand that. We can create our own destiny. And I know we can. There's so much information out there for people that are able to help us, but you have to want something. And I know with addiction and substance abuse, all that makes it that much harder. Mental illness makes it that much harder. But we can create something positive and good out of something bad. It isn't easy, but I know we can. There's so many stories, and sometimes the ugly ones or the hard ones to share are people are most willing to tell, which is really interesting because you'd think that they'd be embarrassed or, they just didn't want to get into again. But sometimes I have to take a break from interviewing someone who has a story of an abusive past as a child, because I think my audience, the people listening, need a break from it too, because there are good moms out there as well. So that is an important part of how I have to work my show. But it's amazing. The sun comes up every day. So what you have to make a decision as to what you're going to do that the next day. You're either going to be in a deep, dark hole and bury yourself, or you're going to take that stride, that first step forward. And again, better than anyone, how hard that journey is. But there is a way out of it. And by talking about it, you hear more and more stories of people who have had similar experiences and how they get out of it. You meet people who have had really great experiences growing up with their mom or a female role model, because that's also really important if your mom isn't available, right? A female role model. But it's not giving up. It's always looking to brighter side of things. But for many people, they don't even know how to look to the brighter side of something.
You said when we first started talking that we become who we are because of or in spite of our mothers.
Right. Are you who you are because of or in spite of your mom?
What does that mean based on your experience?
Well, I was lucky. I had a woman who, and it's so funny because I do the same thing to my boys. Why don't you contact so-and-so? It might be an interesting job or position there for you. Or I read this book. I think this would be really good for you. She was constantly ripping out articles from the New York Times or a newspaper and sending them to this. Oh, I thought you'd like this, whether it was nutrition or health, nutrition, health, art, anything job related. She was always encouraging us. It's as though maybe it was something that she had wished she had pursued. I don't know. But she was always thinking of her kids, saying, I think this might interest you. And there's another story I could tell about something that she did for me, which is really funny, but I want to finish this thought. So are you who you are today because of or in spite of your mom? Okay, so did your mom have a wonderful effect on you, and she helped you keep that positive attitude, made you comfortable in your own skin, believe in yourself? Did she encourage you to move on, that you're working in the right direction? Well, whether it wasn't a straight trajectory to what you're interested in, because sometimes you have to go sideways, right, to achieve things. Or your mom destroyed you and you're still down on your luck.
Yeah, and that's a hard place to be, right? Because
oh my gosh,
there's this weird space in which, and I'm sure you probably have done this too, because we all do, where we can step into the victim role and we can be like, my mom made me this way.
Yeah.
And we play this game. And it's funny because I was sitting in, I went to a Tony Robbins seminar a few years ago, and it's big. There's like 2,000 people in there. It's kind of this really intense experience. And he said something that, like, as I'm taking notes, I just like pause myself in my tracks. And he says, so many of you out here, and it was funny because he's actually speaking to mothers specifically, because he was doing this intervention, having this transformation moment with this person. The person was talking about how their mom had like fucked their life up. And he says, it's really funny. You blame your mom for all of your problems, but none of your gifts. And I was blown away by that, because that was just this really interesting thought of, wait, if you're going to blame them for the bad, you have to blame them for the good as well. I think that sometimes we do ourselves a disservice of like looking at the positive elements. One of the things that you really kind of brought out of me in that moment where you were interviewing me was, I was like, yeah, there were some really beautiful things that I got from my mother. Like, and I won't ever.
Valspar Ultra starts at just $29.98 a gallon. So we've got you covered when your daughter wants to paint her room again, after last year's masterpiece of a unicorn mural.
Dad, please.
Or when you realize that maybe you went too hard on the grayish.
I miss color.
Or when you were sure you wanted a home gym, but your elliptical is currently hanging your laundry.
What about a home office?
Shop everything you need for your next phase with Valspar. Available at Lowe's. Price varies by Shein.
Or deny that. Do you think that you see people have a hard time with accepting that, even if they had something bad in terms of their relationship with their mother, that they're still like redeeming qualities about her?
Those are gifts. Those are to be looked at as gifts. And Wayne Dyer, his father was a major alcoholic and treated him horribly. And he looked at his relationship with his dad for inspiring him to do everything, anything and everything to prove his dad wrong, or not out of resentment, but he used the animosity and the hatred to launch himself forward into the antithesis of what he had grown up with. My husband's dad was really, really tough on him, treated of 4 kids, he has 3 sisters, treated my husband way differently than he did the daughters, right? So he used that example as how not to be a father. He used his own dad as an example of how not to be a dad when it was in relation to our 2 sons. So that and we talk about it all the time, that's a huge gift. You learn from someone's whether it's anger or resentment, you turn that around and say, well, I don't want to be like that. So I'm going to make myself or turn my life around, and I'm going to either prove them wrong or I'm just going to be happy, because that would make someone even more mad if you're happy all the time, right? So you have an opportunity to use those negative experiences as energy to launch you into a new direction.
Yeah. And you have to get out of your own way. You spoke to this a few minutes ago.
We are all in our own way, regardless of our, probably our worst enemy is ourselves sometimes.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I notice is that we can kind of pick up our self-narrative from the people who raise us. What narrative do you think that you've had to actually let go of that your mother gave you?
It's so interesting, because I was thinking about this before. She had, for as fantastic and amazing as she was, her self-esteem was not very high. She didn't consider herself amazing and incredible and smart and all those things. She knew that she probably was, right? But she never took time for herself, because she always had the whole brood to take care of. So that may be a part of it. But that self-confidence thing, I'm sure myself and my siblings, we have that as well, which is pretty funny. Because it was so not true. Of all things, this woman, she was such a dynamite. She wasn't afraid to voice her opinion. We grew up Catholic, and yet she would go into confession, and we'd be sitting in the church. She'd be in there for 45 minutes having a theological discussion with the priest, because she did not agree with his interpretation. She was so passionate about her faith, but she did not agree with the rigid perspective of the Catholic Church. And she stood up for that regularly. So it helped us with our spirituality to have that different perspective. We used to go to Mass with her. She would go every morning. And during the summer, we would be out near the beach. And there was a Girl Scout camp that had this beautiful outdoor chapel. And it was an 8:00 Mass. The morning fog, the dew would still be there, and the birds would be flying in and out of this chapel, because it was just a roof. It was no walls. And there was so much spiritual presence there. I didn't need this fancy church with the marble and the gold. And it was just, God was present. Whatever spirit you believe in, it was there. And that's one of the biggest gifts that she gave us. And I wish that she believed in herself more.
That's interesting. Yeah, because we're watching, right? As children, like we're watching everything our parents do, and we can choose to model that or not. And finding self-esteem, right? If you go look at this journey of life that we're on, it's one of the arguably the most difficult things we do, is that thing about believing in yourself, right? You talk about that.
Boy.
But those dynamics from the past, they play a role. Like I want to talk about, and again, because I'm looking at you from this scope of, you're an expert of knowing people's relationships with their mothers, because you have the hours put in, right? I'm always like,
I got some hours.
Who's done their 10,000, right? Who's an expert? You've listened to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. So you understand the dynamics probably better even than I would argue most psychologists and therapists, right? And in a sense, in some ways, you probably are a little bit of both of those things. I want to explore some dynamics here for a moment and ask you some very pointed questions. Now, obviously, because of your background in creating this show, you might be a little bit biased, and I might be a little bit biased too, and that's okay. The one thing I want to get here to is just truth. Like, what do you actually see? And so, how do you think, this is so apropos to what we were just talking about, how do you think that our relationship with our mothers shape our confidence, our self-worth, and our identity? And what have you seen as the commonalities between the people who you've talked to?
I think everyone is affected by their relationship with their mom. Even I see it in the siblings, some of my siblings in my family. Everyone had different relationships with my mom. Some great, some not so great, and some unable to let go of the blame that they think that my mom, exposed them to, whatever. I think everyone, it's a sponge. We're like a sponge, right? If you want to absorb all of your mom and take it with you, the good and the bad, you have to eventually weed out what you think works for you. Again, our moms, female role models, are not goddesses. Some people think they are, and we often have them on the pedestal. We rely on them for everything. Oh my gosh, these poor women are just, it's intense what we put on our moms. So it's like a mixing bowl, right? The good and the bad, everything's in there. And you take out what is useful, what's helpful to you. Again, they didn't have a PhD in motherhood. They didn't have all the tools, especially way back, 20, 30, 40 years ago. They didn't even speak English. There's so many parents today that the parents don't speak English and the children become the translator at a very young age. But the responsibility of a mom is huge. I think for the most part, moms try to do their best. And this is what a phrase used to really make me mad when I first started interviewing people. She did the best she could with what she had. And I was like, they abused you. They abandoned you. They neglected you. You name it. The list can go on and on and on. And you're telling me that you've accepted that she did the best she could with what she had. I was like, they put you on a train at 4 years old across the country to go have you spend time with an aunt because she couldn't deal with you. And it took me a really long time to accept that phrase. And I think that don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you use that phrase as well. Did you, about your mom, or maybe not?
I had made a post that went awfully viral a few years ago.
Yeah.
Because I was saying in agreement with what you just said, I don't know that your parents did do the best that they could.
They didn't know what they were doing, half of them.
Yeah, and I always felt like it was kind of a cop-out to create this space of permission giving for people who maybe didn't really show up. And and I get it. And that's a really hard thing because I look at my own life and I go, am I doing the best that I can? Am I leveraging all my tools and opportunities? My touch is a favor. Am I doing the things? And a lot of time, even with all the things happening in my life and all the amazing stuff I'm doing, a lot of time the answer is no. I'm like, no, I'm not. Right. And so that went a little bit viral. But in that space, I think it's one of those things where it's almost a societal norm. It's like a colloquialism. We just say it. And we don't really put the thought or meaning behind it. But I think that actually parlays into the next question I wanted to ask you, because I think it's very fitting. For those that you've talked to and you've seen them have such difficult and traumatic relationships with their mothers, what have you learned about the path to healing?
I think it's interesting. Some have used the arts to heal, or music to heal, whether that's the trade that they went into, because that's it's known to help people emotionally and psychologically, art therapy and music therapy and all that kind of stuff. And I think this too, your health, how you treat your body and the food that you intake, your physical exercise, all of that, the energy, it transforms your brain and your mental state. There's so many different ways to combat it. But I think the easiest thing to do is to forgive, if that's possible. Is that even easy? I think why they say she did the best she could with it is it's a way of forgiveness so they can move on. Mm-hmm. I think they just have to get to that place after all they've been through, after the abandonment and all that, abusing the siblings and all that. I mean, these kids have to grow up when they're 7 years old, 5 years old, 4 years old. You were taking care of your mom, making 911 calls. I think it gets to the point where they have to somehow learn to let it go or accept that she did the best she could with what she had. Or they get into narcotics and they try and soothe themselves, which isn't healthy.
Yeah, and it's tough because that forgiveness can feel like one of the hardest parts of the journey. And it's arguably one of the most important parts of the journey. And you hear these awfulsome stories. And the thing, do you ever, when you're having these conversations with people, do you ever have moments and you're like, I don't even understand how you could forgive that?
I don't even know how they're still walking and functioning today. And then they have their own children. So that's where it comes to, they said, screw you. I want, you'll be in my life. They put these parameters up, but then they say, I'm going to do the antithesis in raising my kids. And they find the right partner if they need a partner. And they're able to turn it all around and give their kids what they didn't have. Sometimes that can backfire too, because then you wind up giving your kids everything, material things and all that because you didn't have it. And then that creates another whole situation. But I don't know any other way to get through life because it can be really tough. It can be tough. And I applaud everybody and anybody who has had an experience similar to yours or different, but rough, to even be present, to have a smile on your face, to be able to hug somebody, to give that emotion when you never had it growing up. You didn't know what hugs and saying, I love you at the end of every phone call, texting your kids or your mom saying, love you, if you've never had that, it's important to try and bring that into your life.
I agree. And I think that does, as hard as it is, the pathway does start with that space of forgiveness. And, I think that you've had so many beautiful conversations too, right? And so many powerful and thought-provoking conversations. Is there one story from your like just in general where you're like, that changed the way I think about how I'm a mother? And the reason that I ask this, because I'm a man, I will never be a mother. But I will have a wife and she will be a mother. And a lot of the women who listen to this show are mothers. I have my demos, like something like 70% of the people who listen to this show have children. Mm-hmm. And so is there any story where you're like, that actually changed the way I'm a mother now? And I think that this would be beneficial for everyone to take into consideration.
Wow. So I guess, let me start from my experience as a mom. Okay. So I had a wonderful mom. Yes, she had her flaws and things that, she was great, but I needed to figure out who I was and how I was going to work in tandem with my husband, because that was the team, right? I luckily had a husband. He traveled a lot for business, so I was home a lot alone with the boys, but he was working really, really hard. So the two of us had to be on the same page. I didn't get married till I was 36. So I already kind of had a big education in what I wanted or didn't have, what I wanted and didn't want in my partner. And I also had 6 siblings above me who married once or twice or eloped and whatever. So I have like a PhD just from my family experience and listening and seeing my siblings. But the most important thing for me, as far as being a good mom, I learned was to really listen to your kids. Not just hear what they're saying as you're in the middle of, you're on your phone or you're getting ready for dinner and they're talking to you like, yeah, I hear you. You have to actually listen to your kids, put your phone down, turn the computer off, and look at them in the eye and say, what's going on? Or do you want to go out for a walk? Or what do you want to talk about? It's listening. It's not hearing what they're saying to you. It's listening. And we're very lucky with my boys. They were born, they weren't, cell phones weren't big 20 something years ago, right? They weren't as popular. We weren't on them 24/7. So they weren't exposed to that. We didn't go to dinner. If we went out to dinner, we didn't go to dinner with a computer or an iPad or something and put them with headphones on and watch a movie at dinner. We didn't do
That's
that.
the craziest thing in the world to me, by the way.
You know, everyone has their reasons for doing things, and I can't judge. But the reason we would go out to dinner was to have conversation with each other. So that, again, comes back to my childhood, right? We had these family dinners every single night. The 9 of us were around that table, and we were there for hours. So do I have one story that there's so many wonderful stories? It's the relationship. Did you turn your kids on to reading books? Like one good friend of mine, her mom, she recently passed away, but her parents owned a general store. And she remembers sitting in the little nook in, I don't know if it was the front window of the store, it was upstate New York, but she would crawl up with and have piles of books with her. And she just loved to read because that's what she was exposed to as a child. It's all those beautiful little dreamy stories of something that their mom or their dad got them interested in. And it just, their imagination flourished and was creative. And it was something that they hadn't been engaging with one-on-one that kept them connected. You know, now it's okay, you do your sports, you do your homework, and then you got to go to bed and all that. But when you have a craft or something that you can bond one-on-one with the mom and the child, I think you establish a much more meaningful relationship. I mean, now people go and throw axes at places. If that's something you want to do with your kid, then go do it. But it's that one-on-one time that I think when you really get to know who your parent is.
Yeah, you know, it's so funny. I was just having this conversation with someone the other night where they kind of rubbed me the wrong way because I saw this interaction that they had with their father. And I looked at him and I was like, do you have any idea how lucky you are that you have a father that gives a shit enough to pick up the phone and call you?
Yeah.
And it's like that thing that you're talking about is so true. It's so true. And you know, part of it and my hopes is as I think about the potentiality of my future and family and children, all those things, it's very much about the connectedness. That's the reason why I think that people love your show so much, because in the same way that we all have to eat and eventually die, we all also have a mother. Nobody doesn't have a mother, right? You know, so
not
like,
yet anyway.
Yeah,
Science
totally.
hasn't done that yet.
Yeah, true. Right. And so you think about that, and every single one of us, we have that shared experience. And so I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your experience and highlighting some of with your mother and your thoughts and your guest and those things, because I think it's just beautiful. And I think that it's one of those conversations we should be having more of. And we should be acknowledging. And then maybe one day I'll start my own podcast about things that I should have listened to my father about, right? But I want to say thank you for people who want to check out the show and learn more about what you do. Where can they find you?
You can, if you Google "should have listened to my mother" podcast or "should have listened to my mother" or Jackie Tantillo, you can find us anywhere and everywhere. All social media platforms. You know, after I worked in radio for the last 40 years or so and doing voiceovers and things. So it's really kind of fun to be doing this long format, you know, conversations again. And that's what I love about it. But yeah, you can find us "should have listened to my mother" or Jackie Tantillo.
Brilliant. And guys, remember, go to thinkunbrokenpodcast.com for that and more in the show notes. My last question, my friend, what does it mean to you to be unbroken?
It means to be whole and sound. If I can be grounded and take the time to love myself, 'cause that's something else my mom, that was, you know, I wish she had loved herself more. If I can take the time to really love myself and give myself equal time as much as I give to others, I think I'm in the right direction of being unbroken.
Love that. Thank you so much for being here, Unbroken Nation, my friends. Thank you all for listening. Please share this with someone in your life, maybe even your mother, if it brought you any value today. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.
Thank you so much.
And until
Thank you.
next time, be unbroken. I'll see you guys.
Thank you so much for listening to Think Unbroken. Please share this episode with someone who could use it and help us move forward in our mission of ending generational trauma in our lifetime. And if you would, please take 5 seconds to pop on iTunes or Spotify, hit that 5-star, leave a review, and you can also reach out to us on social at Michael Unbroken or at Think Unbroken. And of course, you can check out our YouTube channel at Think Unbroken. Thank you for being a part of Unbroken Nation, my friends, and until next time, be unbroken. We'll be right back to today's show, but before we do, I want to let you know that you can get a free copy of my first book, Think Unbroken, Understanding and Overcoming Childhood Trauma, when you leave a review for the podcast on Apple Podcast, either on desktop or on your phone. All you have to do is go to Apple Podcasts, look up Think Unbroken, click follow in the top right, and then go and leave a review at the bottom. And when you leave that review, screenshot it and send it over to book.thinkunbroken.com, where you can upload your contact and mailing information, and we will send you a free copy of this award-winning best-selling book, absolutely free, including shipping. Just go to book.thinkunbroken.com to upload your screenshot review from Apple Podcasts for the Think Unbroken podcast. And until next time, my friend, be unbroken. I'll see ya.